Hello everyone, my name is Kitty and I'm an academic doctor working in the UK. In light of the recent news about the below inflation pay rise offered to NHS staff, which is in reality a real terms pay cut, especially for junior doctors, in this video I want to share with you guys today about how much I earned as a foundation doctor in each of the 6 4-month rotations that I did over the last 2 years in F1 and F2, as well as looking at the corresponding working rota and hours. For those of you who are not familiar with the NHS system, this is the first 2 years of working as a doctor after graduating from medical school. I will also be talking about the educational and academic expenses that I had related to the profession to give an idea of the costs of being a doctor in a vocational training job. And finally, I would like to discuss the real terms pay cuts that junior doctors have been facing in this country for the last decade and why this latest DDRB report is a bit of a kick in the teeth. So firstly, to quickly explain how a doctor's salary works in England, there is a base pay scale per training grade, which is for a 40-hour work week, so equivalent to 8 hours a day for 5 days. For any hours rotated beyond these 40 hours, these are paid prorated with an additional premium for unsocial out-of-hours work, for example, twilights and night shifts, and shifts worked over a weekend or bank holiday. In my F1 year, so the first year of being a doctor after graduating from medical school, the base pay for a 40-hour week was £28,243. In my first job in care of the elderly, my average weekly hours was 45 hours and 45 minutes, with a 1 in 7 weekend rota. You can see from the generic schedule here on the screen that the job involves some normal days, which are 8 till 4, as well as long days on call once a week from 8 till 8:30, clerking shifts from 11 till 8, and strings of night shifts which started from 8 PM and lasted until 8:30 AM the next day. All in all, this was not really a terrible rota, all things considered, and looking at the pay slip, you can see that my base pay here, as well as the calculations of hours worked, and the pay for basic pay for the 40-hour week. Additional hours beyond this were also shown, and the night and weekend premiums, and this all equated to a take-home value of £2,095.54 after a 9% pension payment, national insurance deductions, and £15 for the doctor's mess. If you have student loan repayments, this was usually another couple £100 from your paycheck. In my second job in trauma and orthopedics, my average weekly hours actually increased to 48 hours per week, which is the limit from the European Working Time Directive. The average day is now 8 till 5, long days 8 till 9, and weekends were more frequent with 1 in 4. However, at my particular trust as an F1, we didn't have to do any nights, so this worked out to a pay slip actually for slightly less take home of £2,078.02. Finally, in my third F1 rotation of vascular surgery, this was by far the busiest F1 rota with an average weekly hour of 47 hours and 30 minutes. There are some weeks, however, where you will end up doing 66-hour weeks. For example, in this week here, you can see where you have to do 3 9-hour normal day shifts, followed by 3 13-hour weekend on-call shifts, and the weekends were 1 in 4. Because of this, the rota worked out to a take-home of £2,287.80 per month. All in all, for my F1 year, I calculated that my pre-tax income was £36,835.24, and my take-home pay after deductions were £24,309.44. Moving on to my F2 year, my base pay for a 40-hour week has now increased to £33,345 per annum from 28k back in F1. My first job was in stroke medicine, and this was a pretty crap rota really, with an average 47 weekly hours and a 1 in 3.75 weekend shift, and plenty of night shifts and on-calls to go around, and again up to the 66-hour work week again. The most brutal part of this rota was actually working 8 till 5 on a weekend, which was followed directly by a full set of 4 days of nights from 8 PM till 9 AM the next day. So you would work approximately 70 hours in 7 days and probably shorten your life expectancy a little bit as well. For that hard work, my take home was £2,602.83 per month. Notably, I was working as an academic foundation doctor at this point with 1 day a week equivalent dedicated to academic work, but because my academic days can only be scheduled on normal working days that are 8 till 5, this did not affect my pay compared to my purely clinical colleagues. For my next 2 rotations in F2, however, I would take a significant pay cut, and this is because I was on my academic block where I was essentially working full-time in research with some clinical stays sprinkled in, but all of these were 8 till 4, 8 till 5, 8-hour days, so I was only taking home the absolute base pay for F2. This was then followed by my F2 GP rotation, where I was again only working a regular 40-hour week. So this turned out to be quite a dire drop in my salary to £1,973.12, which is a whopping £600 less than my stroke job and then some. Because of these two low-paying rotations, my total pre-tax income for my F2 year was £37,222.57, and my take-home pay was £26,242.16, which is only about £2,000 more than my F1 salary, despite the significant jump in base pay. To make up for the lower paying rotations somewhat and for the academic expenses that I'll come to in a few minutes, I did take on some locum shifts as an F2, but this was quite limited as you can only fit the locums in on your own time around the Monday to Friday 40-hour work week rota, which is quite difficult. And my trusty current going rate for a locum F2 doctor was about £45 in hours and £55 out of hours, for example, for evening, nights and weekends. All in all, I managed to fit in 10 locum shifts during my last F2 GP rotation and earned around an extra £2,500. I say around because the last couple shifts hasn't actually been paid yet, so that's not an exact value. These locum shifts included doing normal day shifts as a surgical F2 to plug rota gaps from 8 till 5, which paid around £213, post-tax, long day shifts, which is 8 till 9 with £20 extra for the unsocial hours, and 13-hour weekend shifts, which were all paid the out-of-hours rate of £55 per hour, or about £450 a day after deductions. So that's my income as a foundation doctor for the past 2 years after graduating from 5 years of medical school. So now let's talk about my expenses, specifically the expenses related to being a doctor in the UK and career progression. So firstly, there's the fee to the GMC, which every doctor in the UK needs to pay in order to keep practicing medicine, and this costs £157 in my F1 year and £161 in F2. Then there's the 2-part MRCS exams, which I had to sit in order to eventually progress into surgical training. I was unable to get any funding from the training deanery to pay towards these exams as a foundation trainee, so they had to be purely self-funded. The MRCS Part A exam cost £550 to book, and the study resources and question banks cost another £232, bringing a total to £782. The MRCS Part B exam was even more costly at £997, and travelling to the exam itself and buying the study resources and courses was about £1,400, bringing the total to £2,424.65. And if I had failed any of these exams, I would have had to pay the same fee again. Now that I've passed the exam, I then need to pay the Royal College of Surgeons fees, and for the first year for me, this was £158. Then there are some courses that I went on, which again, unfortunately, were not funded by my deanery, despite being required training courses for a surgical career. And this included the Basic Surgical Skills course, or the BSS, for £650, and the Advanced Trauma Life Support, or the ATLS course, which cost £750. Although courses like this and the MRCS exams might be funded in core surgical training, so the next step above foundation training, having done them was beneficial when you're applying for a CST job in the first place, so it's not really much of a choice. I also attended some research courses, which is another £150, and a statistic course, which was £110, and another more expensive research course, which was funded by the university for my academic training. Then I presented my research at a few conferences in order to keep building my medical and academic CV. And again, for those unfamiliar, doctors need to build up an up-to-date portfolio, engaging with research, teaching, audits, to name a few, in order to be competitive when applying for a training job. So again, whilst this is all technically optional, we all have to do it, particularly for me as an academic trainee. In my F1 year, I attended 3 virtual conferences. One cost around £100, and I was able to attend the second conference for free after entering an essay competition, and the third exempted the fee for registration for trainee presenters. There were no additional travel costs because the meetings were virtual. In my F2 year, I presented at the ACID conference, which cost £353, including flights and accommodation, followed by the SRS meeting, which is another £350, although I did manage to get this funded by the deanery. And finally, I presented at another £155 conference, hoping again to get this funded, but my request was actually declined, so no luck there. All in all, this came to a depressing head of £5,951.61, excluding the one funded conference. There are probably a few extra things that I paid for, like books about medical interviews along the way, but you get the gist. The expense and training progression as a doctor is vast, and there is little to no support for funding a lot of essential exams and courses, and this is likely to continue for the rest of my career. And of course, for a lot of people who are less fortunate, this is on top of a lot of debt accrued from going to medical school in the first place, which is usually in the region of around 70k for most medical students these days. So then, onto the latest news about the NHS pay, which essentially translates to junior doctors getting a massive pay cut this year, on top of the accumulated real terms pay cut in the last decade. And I'll explain this in a bit. But to be absolutely clear, I think that all NHS staff, including our nursing colleagues, HCAs, radiographers, porters, are all underpaid. But because I'm a doctor myself, my focus in this video is just going to be about my own profession. So then, what exactly is this news recently about the NHS staff pay and doctors' pay, and how do we understand it? Well, so the review body of doctors and dentists remuneration, or the DDRB, are an independent body that advises the UK government on what doctors and dentists should be paid and consider any changes over the years. So they take into account things like the finances for the NHS, the economy of the country, workforce planning, etc., and recommend what doctors should be paid year on year. On the 19th of July 2022, the DDRB recommended that all NHS staff would be getting a 4.5% pay uplift, but this did not include junior doctors, which are from any newly qualified doctor out of medical school to literally senior registrars with over 10 years of experience. Instead, we would be getting our usual 2% pay rise. And the reason for this is because back in 2016, the National Junior Doctors Strike led to an agreement between the BMA, the Doctors Union, and the government in 2018 to a multi-year deal for a 2% pay uplift per year for 4 years until 2023. After almost a decade of seeing no real increase in doctor salaries since 2008. At the time, of course, no one predicted that we would experience a worldwide pandemic, which created even more pressure on an already stretched NHS system and the associated inflation due to disruption of the economy from various world events. And there are really several problems with the DDRB recommendations that, in my view, does not reflect the reality that doctors, amongst all other NHS staff, are becoming more underpaid and undervalued. In 2022, inflation has now reached 11.7%, and this effectively means that a 4.5% pay rise is actually a 7.2% real terms pay cut because your money doesn't go as far, and the 2% uplift for junior doctors translate to a 9.7%, so nearly 10% real terms pay cut. So essentially, due to rising market prices, you can now buy less with the same amount of money because your salary has not increased to match inflation in the market. This is the equivalent of basically working the entire next month of August completely for free. Of course, you could argue that everyone in the country is probably facing the same issues, but we also have to consider the fact that doctors have experienced an erosion of pay for the last decade prior to the introduction of the 2018 contract. As you can see on this graph here calculated by the BMA, pay awards for junior doctors from 2008 to 2022 has actually delivered a 26.1% real terms pay cut. In other words, a junior doctor today is earning nearly a third less in wages compared to a junior doctor in 2008, despite having the same responsibility and the same job. This picture on Twitter of a pay slip from an SHO, so someone who's equivalent to my grade of training right now, showed that their salary in 2003 was almost identical to an SHO salary today, which would be equivalent to £3,200 in today's money adjusting for inflation, or a take-home value of £38,400 per year. In contrast, the government MPs have received a pay rise of 27.9% over the last 10 years, and although this is not quite matching inflation, it's certainly a much better pay compared to NHS frontline workers. And finally, the recent 2022 GMC National Training Survey has demonstrated that over the last year, the risk of burnout amongst doctors is now the highest it has ever been, and there is an increasing number of doctors considering leaving the NHS. All of these were submitted to the DDRB as evidenced by the BMA Doctors Union for consideration when adjusting doctors' pay beyond the 2% multi-year deal, but this was clearly ignored in the recent recommendation. And that is why a lot of colleagues and myself are angry, and there is an increasingly strong appetite for the BMA to lobby for a full pay restoration for junior doctors, because a doctor today is not worth a third less than a doctor from 15 years ago. Now, with all due respect to other professions, the reality is that being a doctor is a unique job that is not comparable to other occupations because of the rigorous training and debts required to become a doctor, the level of responsibility that we have in treating patients, and the out-of-hours work. And this is without considering the stress that the pandemic has put on frontline doctors and NHS staff over the past 2 years, who put themselves at a real health risk and exposure to COVID-19. The bottom line is that it's the responsibility of the government to pay its doctors fairly, as well as other public service workers, whether it be nurses, HCAs, rail workers, for working through the pandemic and propping up the country. So what can we do now? Well, if you're a doctor, I would highly recommend joining or rejoining the BMA Doctors Union, which is free until October this year. Going forward, in order for pay negotiations and, if it comes to it, industrial action to go through, we will need to stand together as a profession to ballot. There's already plenty of momentum and plans from the BMA to seriously consider balloting its members in the next coming weeks and months for industrial action. And in order for this to progress, we will need to meet the requirement from the government that 50% of the members must vote in the ballot and 40% must agree to IA before this can go through legally. So we do need as much help as we can get. Additionally, on Monday the 25th of July, Doctors Vote and the BMA will be holding a protest in London outside the Department for Health and Social Care at 6:30 p.m. If you are around London, even if you're a medical student or you know someone who works in the NHS, please do turn up and show your support. So that's it for this video. Sorry for perhaps the slightly more serious tone to this video, but this is an issue that I feel very strongly about, and you should too. If you have any questions, please do leave a comment below. Let me know if you like this type of video and would like more content like this in the future. Don't forget to leave a thumbs up and subscribe for future content. That's it for now, and I'll see you all next time.